Welcome to the American Chronicles podcast. I'm Vlad Davidiak. As America's debt continues to grow and American workers shoulder more of the burden of never-ending fiscal responsibility, Americans for Fair Taxation, a U.S. political advocacy group dedicated to fundamental tax code replacement, has led the way in advocacy and activism. As chairman and president of Americans for Fair Taxation, Stephen L. Hayes has dedicated a lifetime to finding and implementing alternatives to the income tax and helps to lead the effort to shepherd legislation through the legislative process. He joined the show to discuss prospects for tax reform in the Trump administration and the pending inauguration. Coming up next in the American Chronicles. Stephen L. Hayes, welcome to the American Chronicles.
Vlad, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate you joining the show primarily because you've done so much work with regard to reforming the tax structure of the United States, which, as most people who are really involved with politics and who are familiar with the political process understand, is by and large the driving factor in almost every single decision that's made and every single thing that's done by the government, not just in terms of fiscal policy, but in terms of social policy as well.
It sure seemed to be that.
Well,
yes.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'd like to do first, though, is I'd like you to talk a little bit about your background. Let us know how you came to become chairman and president of Americans for Fair Taxation, because that's a huge leap from being someone who obviously started in the private sector as a businessman, and then now you've become someone who's an advocate for this.
Well, I started off on what I now consider on the bad side, in the sense that I was a person who, as an attorney, who became rather proficient in helping structure what we used to call tax shelters.
Okay.
And this was back starting in the 70s, where if you made an investment in a certain way, you could achieve tax savings to offset your income tax, because income tax rates could be as high as 70%. So there was a lot of that going on. Back then it was legal, meaning that there was nothing that was being done, at least that I was party to, that wasn't specifically allowed for. But what happened is that every time you would do these types of tax savings devices, the law would change and it would be cut out. And after a while, it became pretty apparent to me that the system was really broken, because, as you said, everything was being done in businesses anyway, and some personally, but mostly in businesses who I worked with, you had too many people where the tax tail supposedly was waving the dog. And instead of it being a legitimate reason, their first thought was, well, how can I do something that'll save me on taxes, not how can I do something to make more money?
Right.
So, it became apparent to me at that, and then in the 80s, in 86, I had a group of clients who asked me to go up to D.C., and I went up, and it was about a specific provision in the tax reform bill that was going to change the way that pensions were set up. And I went up there and had a lot of empirical evidence, in some studies and all, that showed that if they did that the people, there might be a very small percentage of people who have been abusing these provisions, but that literally hundreds of thousands of people would no longer be part of a pension plan. And they all, on the Senate Finance Committee, they were all Republicans, I met with all of them, and they all agreed. And then 3 days later, they passed the bill exactly as it was stated before, no changes. And that was my first real wake-up call to Congress not necessarily doing things that make the most sense, but doing things that, just sort of, I don't know, they sort of blindly fall into. That's the only way I can say it. I don't think it was dishonesty. I just think it was ignorance. And I started thinking, this whole mess could be changed so easily. And initially I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we had a flat income tax? Because then a lot of the things could be changed. But then I looked at it and said, and this was back in the days where everybody had big libraries, I looked around and I saw almost all of my tax books were dedicated not to figuring out how much tax you owe, because that's simple. Once you get your income, you multiply by a percentage. But the various things that constituted deductions from taxable income. And a flat income tax, particularly on the business side, isn't going to address that, because you still have to do all those same calculations. And I also saw that this was, still in the 80s. In 86, the tax reform was passed, and there were already changes being made in 87, 88. And since then, there have been over, 17,000 changes. And it's very obvious that if you leave the income tax weed in place, that it's going to grow back up again, no matter how much you lop off the top. So that's when I started looking at what for then had been a very successful model in many states, and that was a sales tax. And there were some people who had been advocating it as instead of the income tax for a long time. And I started looking at it, and that's why a group of us got together in 1990 and said, let's do a retail sales tax replacing the income tax. And the earliest congressional sponsor was a gentleman from Louisiana named Billy Tozan, and it became the Tozan bill, and that's how it started. And then it evolved in the late 1990s to the fair tax, which was similar, but it just funded Social Security as well, so it increased the rate. But effectively, that's what we've been doing. I am introduced, I hope with some lovingly, so to speak, but I'm introduced at some of these rallies as a recovering tax attorney, Vlad, because that's what I used to do. I quit doing it because I felt like it was, it was really hurting the problem, because the people that I was helping escape taxes were the people that if they complained enough would be heard. And certainly that's become more and more the case. And the other problem that was apparent even back in the 80s, but it's really apparent today, was that there was a growing disillusionment with not only the income tax, but also with government. And that evasion of the tax was growing, and under the income tax, which essentially is really voluntary. You file your own deductions, you file your own tax return. A lot of people were evading the tax, and a study done 4 years ago estimated that it's up to $600 billion a year now, Vlad. Evasion of the income payroll tax.
Wow.
So it's a broken system. It encourages companies to put products overseas and bring them back here. It discourages American exports. And it is really not a system for the 21st century. It's a system back when we had mostly employer-employees, and now we're at a point in our labor force where 40% are non-traditional workers, meaning they don't really have the employer-employee relationship that almost everybody had when I grew up. So that's my background. That's how I got into it, and that's how we came up with the fair tax.
We're speaking with Stephen L. Hayes. He's the chairman and president of Americans for Fair Taxation. You can find them online at fairtax.org, and you can also follow them on Twitter at fairtaxofficial. Mr. Hayes, one thing that always troubles me, and you're talking about the history of this particular movement, and you're talking about dates like 1990, 1988, 2000. A lot of those dates coincide with Republican governance in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And so, the Republicans have this long history of association and affinity, really, with reforming tax structures. What's the holdup? What has prevented this from actually going through?
Vlad, I think that is the verbiage and the propaganda, the public relations spin. But in truth, there is a tremendous establishment in Washington, Republican and Democrat, that have come to benefit greatly, not only members through getting huge donations in some cases, but also the city itself. The tax code has become, for the Democrats, a way to reward groups and punish others. The tax code has become, for the Republicans, the same way, and they sell those rewards and punishments accordingly. But it's also become a retirement annuity for many, because back when I started in the 90s, many of the members who I worked with are now out of Congress, and they're lobbyists making $1.5 million, $2 million a year as a lobbyist. What are they doing? Primarily working to secure benefits from the tax code. So when you've got someone like Ryan, who was an original co-sponsor of the fair tax, Kevin Brady, was an original co-sponsor of the fair tax. He's somebody that I've talked to a number of times. He's now chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. Paul Ryan, I've met with, who's now the speaker. They're interested in trying to accomplish many of the things the fair tax does, but doing it through a traditional income tax. Because, Vlad, they know it is a situation that they'll be able to continue to get lots of donations and have lots of power from, because they can reward people or punish them in the income tax. And when I go out and talk to people now, and I'm talking about people outside of the D.C. corridor, and I say, they've got a flat tax proposed, how many of you think it'll be flat in 5 years? No hands go up. How about 3 years? People start laughing at you. It's a system that Democrats and Republicans apparently don't want to change because they feel like it profits them. The only way it's going to change is if enough people join us and put pressure on it, number one, and number two, if we have a president who is not beholden to the go-along, get-along tradition in D.C. And Donald Trump, at least today, is showing that he's not beholden to it. Now, will he get pulled into it and become much, much less of a change president? Hard to say. But at this point, he's asking things that are obvious to you and I and your listeners, such as, we really have to be this complicated? Why can't we do it simpler? Why don't we do something that funds the government but doesn't make people spend inordinate amounts of time trying to find a way to comply? Why don't we get rid of this rat's nest? He asks those kind of sensible questions. And one of the best examples, and Kevin came up, with he and Paul Ryan, but they have now become convinced that border adjustable is important, meaning that you give a break to your companies that do exports so they can compete more effectively overseas. And conversely, you tax the imports that come in so they don't have an unfair advantage on U.S. products. Over in Europe and in all of our trading partners, I think there's 160 countries that have a similar thing, and our biggest trading partners all have it, where when they export to the U.S., they rebate, they give back their approximately 20% value-added tax. So it comes over here at 80% of what it sells for in Europe. And it competes with our products, and we don't tax it. Whereas when we have a product go over there, we don't get back any of the built-in taxes, and let's say it's roughly 20%. And it goes over there and competes with their product, but it's 20% higher because they put the value-added tax on top of it. So we have a lot of incentives for companies to make goods overseas and bring them back into the U.S. And that's what a lot has been going on. And so what we've got is Brady and Ryan trying to do something. And Kevin's from Houston area and from the Woodlands area. He's out there trying to get the benefits of border adjustability, but doing it through the income tax in an enormously complex way that is almost certainly going to be rejected by our trading partners and by the General Agreement Tariffs and Trade. That group is going to say you can't do that with an income tax, even though he's going to try to do it. So to me, that is the real problem, Vlad, and hopefully Trump, who said good things about the fair tax, will look at this morass and say, we don't need any of this. What we need is for everybody to really have a chance to prosper, not just the people that live in this little 30-square-mile area. We need people who are listening to you, Vlad, to prosper. We need my grandson to have a better shot of growing up than he would have had without these reforms. So that's what we need to do. It's not complicated. It's not rocket science. But, boy, it requires somebody who's not beholden on government for their paycheck. And Trump, at least for now, is certainly not beholden to anybody. And if he follows through with his common sense approach and enough people get in touch with him and let him know they support him on it, I think we've got a real chance of some tremendously fundamental reforms that are common sense to everybody but D.C.
Well, do you have any sense of his appointments or the people he's bringing in? Do you have any sense of confidence in any of them who are going to be embracing this policy preference? Do you have any kind of ideas as to who might really lead the charge?
Well, it depends on priorities. Mike Pence was a very enthusiastic co-sponsor of the fair tax when he was in Congress. He is someone who understands it. He understands the benefits. You've got several people. Steve Moore, who is oftentimes seen as a commentator, was on my original board of directors when we did a sales tax. So you've got a lot of people who like the idea, but in Washington, Vlad, you've got to get enough noise to get people's attention.
Right.
Because there are so many things out there that are taking it. I mean, right now, Obamacare is going to probably take all the oxygen out of the room for a while. The Republicans want to repeal it. Trump wants to repeal and replace. They want to get some Democrats behind it. I mean, it's going to be a lot. You've got the immigration issue. You've got tax reform. You've got these various, regulatory reform. You've got these various issues, all of which have to be done through existing apparatus in D.C. I mean, Trump just announced he's going to keep 50 Obama appointees, at least for now, because he can't have continuity with empty seats at the top.
Sure.
And so, it's going to be priorities. Should this be a huge priority? Absolutely it should. Should it be, a front of Obamacare? Well, obviously, I would say it's that, but I'm not sure that it should be. I'm not sure that you shouldn't take care of that first because that has got the most attention on it. But
let's move away.
I think we're going to have people who are going to help promote this with him, and we just have to get the people doing it.
Well, let's move away from the Trump administration focus then on Congress. Obviously, you have Speaker Ryan basically shaping the agenda for the House of Representatives. You have Kevin Brady on the House Ways and Means Committee. So you have two people there that are going to have to actually be directly involved in order for this to succeed. But underneath them, you have 433 other members of Congress who have their views on implementing this legislation as well. What are the odds there? How are things shaping up?
Last year we had 84 co-sponsors. I mean, in the last term. Some of them, like Tom Price was a big co-sponsor. He's now moving into the cabinet. So he'll be gone, but his replacement, I'm certain, will be a co-sponsor. And so you've got a base of people who have co-sponsored the legislation, and we actually think we may hit 100 this term, term of Congress, co-sponsors. On the other hand, if it doesn't get pressure from Trump, then Brady and Ryan are going to do the tap dance. And I want to say something, though, that no matter how critical my comments may seem, I happen to think that Paul Ryan is one of the most charming people in the world. He was very, very pleasant, nice to me. He's an incredibly bright guy. He and I just have different ideas of what will work best. He's certainly an honest guy from everything I can tell. Kevin Brady has always been very much reasonable and willing to talk and all, but again, Kevin, he's under somewhat pressure from Paul Ryan, but he's also trying to do something that in his mind will do the best for tax reform that he can get done. So personally, I like both of them very much, and I think both of them are very sincere. I just think that their approach is going to fail, and it's going to fail badly as we go ahead because of the continuing evasion problem. I mean, Vlad, you probably can look at this yourself, but your listeners, when I give talks now, I ask, how many people have had an opportunity to buy something at a much reduced price for cash, like a service? And everybody in the room raises their hands. And you say, well, is it because of accounting or something? They all start laughing. No, he's not going to report it. And this is a growing epidemic that is bringing down the system, because when you have that many people not complying with the tax code, what does that mean? That means that the only people who are really paying what they should be are two groups. One, employees who have no choice, it's taken out through withholding. Or two, the group of people who choose to pay the right amount. But you have all these other people that are creating deductions besides not reporting income, but just taking unwarranted deductions or writing things off they shouldn't be as deductions. And that's putting more and more pressure on the people that are paying. And that is not sustainable in the long run. Just not sustainable.
We're speaking with Stephen L. Hayes of the Americans for Fair Taxation organization. You can find their website at fairtax.org. You can follow them on Twitter at fairtaxofficial. Mr. Hayes, let's move over from tax reform, because this is going to be something that we won't actually be able to see move forward until the Congress, Speaker of the House, President all dedicate themselves to moving on the issue. And let's shift our view now to the pending inauguration, where it's now 12:01 Eastern Standard Time. We're actually less than 24 hours away from the end of the failed Obama regime. What do you foresee as being the main catalyst for the agenda going forward, at least in the first 100 days of the Trump administration? Obviously, he wants to. He said that top of his focus is going to be on helping the American economy, renewing American employment, getting more people involved in the workforce. What are your thoughts on the upcoming inauguration and what you see as being the first 100 days?
Well, I think everything you've said goes hand in hand with what I believe will be one of the things he thinks, and I think rightly so, that Obamacare has become a very, very big problem for a lot of companies and a lot of people, and it's cutting unemployment. I believe he thinks that there have been too many trade deals that have been made that have been disadvantageous. I think they'll be looking at that. I know he's going to, I know, all reports are that he's going to take an axe to many of the regulations that were put in place by the Obama team that severely restricted businesses and, it just added tons of things on to what should have been a simple process. I mean, they still have those shovel-ready jobs that they passed when he came in that still haven't been able to get approval to be made because of all the regulations. So if you get rid of the ones that are stopping things, keep the sensible ones, he'll do that. I mean, I have hope that he will, once he's in, he will start to question the whole income tax paradigm and say we need to change this way. And as president, he'll be able to put a lot of pressure on the Republicans. But remember, Washington is a three distinctive power parts. One is the presidency, which is great. It's huge. But you've also got Congress. You still have to get things through Congress. Even though Obama put all these orders out and all these things that he did to stop it, look what's going to happen. All the things that he did can be unwound in the same way by a new president. If you do a bill through Congress, you can get much more
Senator
permanent type reform. So I think he's going to have to work with Congress. He's going to have to work with Paul Ryan. He's going to have to work with McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate, where the margin is very, very slim. And I think he's going to have to give up some of his, let's just say, business-like approaches, moderate them to the reality that a lot of these guys are not interested in making wholesale changes to what has become a very, let's just say, cushy environment for them and their former colleagues and their buddies. So I think he's going to have a lot of trouble with that, Vlad. I would love it, I mean, if we lived even in the British system where the prime minister can come in and just basically put things through, and as long as he doesn't totally irritate his members,
Senator Franken.
Tremendous amount of power.
Governor, thank you so much for coming into my office.
We've got to go through all of the, and I think it's fortunate, but we have to go through all the deliberations and all to get a law passed that works. So is he going to have 100 days where everything goes well? I hope so, and I think most people should hope so. However, he's going to have a lot of challenges to make that happen.
I think it's something that America not only hopes, but actually needs.
Yes, 100% agree.
After these past 8
vital.
years, it's just, yeah.
It's vital, and it's like very, very critical that the whole country does better. It's like John F. Kennedy, in response to why he wanted to lower tax rates in the early 60s, he said it's going to spur the economy, and he said a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yep, that's true.
And what you have is if Obama is able to get a lot of those stalled jobs that have already been allocated, the money has been allocated. It's not like you have to reallocate money. If he's able to go through and break through and get a lot of those jobs going and get people working and do things in the inner city like that have already been approved and budgeted. If he's able to do those things and keep it going, you're going to see people going back to work. You're going to see more people walking with that little uplifting step as opposed to their head down. And we're going to all benefit so much, Vlad. It can be so quickly done if you free up the suppression that's been on a lot of the business activities. Not that you let them rape the environment or anything else, because those are all things that have been in place 40 years.
Sure.
But if you go through and take out the things that really don't add any benefit, or if they do, it's 0.1%, and it costs you 5 years to do it plus $1 million. That makes no sense.
Well, here's hoping that that's the challenge that they take on and they go with it that way. My guest has been Stephen L. Hayes of Americans for Fair Taxation, where he serves as chairman and president. You can follow them on Twitter at FairTaxOfficial. You can find them online at fairtax.org. Mr. Hayes, thank you very much for joining us here on the American Chronicles. Please come back anytime.
Well, I really look forward to doing it again, and thanks so much for having me.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Check out my website, VladDavidyuk.com, and make sure to follow me on Twitter at VladDavidyuk. You'll love it. Tons of cool stuff there every single day. Please give the show a great rating and review on iTunes. It really helps other people find us when they're searching for a good show. Until the next time, remember, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction.